Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the salon. And look, once again, we're doing another book versus movie comparison. So buckle in, this is kind of a long one. So the author, Shirley Jackson, should obviously be no stranger to horror fans. She's responsible for what is arguably the greatest haunted house novel of the 20th century, The Haunting of Hill House, which came out in 1959, which has been adapted to an excellent 1963 film directed by Robert Wise, a rather shitty 1999 adaptation, which was directed by Jan de Bont, and was, of course, the loose inspiration for the outstanding Netflix series of the same name, created by Mike Flanagan. Shirley Jackson also wrote the classic short story The Lottery, by the way, which was required reading in schools back when I was just a kid, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Not really sure if people have to read it anymore, but it's a great story. But a novel of hers that doesn't have quite the widespread cultural recognition as Haunting of Hill House is her 1962 Gothic mystery novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. It kind of centers around a multiple murder, and also has, even though I wouldn't call it outright horror necessarily, it has elements of psychological horror to it and an unsettlingly disturbed narrator. I actually first read this book back when I was a teenager, and I loved it. And when I watched the 2018 film adaptation of it a couple of years ago, I knew I'd eventually get around to doing a book versus movie comparison on this channel. And as you can see, the time has arrived to do that very comparison. I reread the novel in one sitting like a few days ago, and then I rewatched the movie a few days after that in preparation for this video. The movie, as of this recording, is, I believe, on Amazon Prime, and I think it's on Shudder. Now, I will say up front that the movie is a largely faithful adaptation of the book, some minor changes here and there, and one rather significant alteration to the ending, which I'm not entirely sure I was on board with. I did understand the reason why they changed it, but I don't know, I'm kind of ambivalent about the change that they made. So as I usually do in these videos, I'll give kind of a detailed summary of the novel, and I'll interject at points where the movie adaptation differed from the source material. Also, as usual, it should be obvious that this breakdown will include spoilers for both book and movie, but I'm telling y'all anyway, just to cover my ass so nobody yell at me. This is your one and only spoiler warning. So, the novel is set in an unspecified small town in New England. It was probably based on North Bennington, Vermont, where Shirley Jackson lived with her husband for some time. The movie was shot in Ireland, standing in for New England, and is set contemporary with the book in the early 1960s. Now, we immediately meet our first-person protagonist, 18-year-old Mary Catherine Blackwood, better known as Mary Cat. She's on one of her twice-weekly visits to the village from this isolated mansion where she lives with her older sister, Constance, and their elderly, kind of wheelchair-bound Uncle Julian. In the movie, Uncle Julian is played by the great Crispin Glover, who's actually quite a bit younger than the character in the novel, at least as I don't think they say how old Julian is in the book, but he seems more like a very old man, and Crispin Glover just comes across as like middle-aged, you know? So as Mary Cat walks to town to pick up groceries and library books and all that kind of stuff, we get the sense right away that Mary Cat has some kind of weird thought processes, kind of bordering on OCD, violent delusions, that kind of thing. And she also comes across, the way her mind works, a lot younger than her stated age, which, as I mentioned before, is 18. She seems like she's been very sheltered, kind of emotionally stunted, that sort of thing. It also becomes pretty clear that the people in this town pretty universally hate the Blackwood family for reasons we don't discover until later, at least in the book. In the movie lets us know the reason within the first 10 minutes, which I understand why they did that, like I said, but it does take some of the suspense out of the build-up, like that the book has. So as Mary Cat's journey continues, we also start to realize the extent of her magical thinking. She very deliberately equates this journey with like moving spaces on a board game, and there's various traps and things like that, like in Candyland. And she has kind of this elaborate set of circumstances that she tries to adhere to so that nothing bad will happen to her, just classic magical thinking. So after she picks up the groceries and the library books, she stops at a diner for a cup of black coffee. She always does this every time she goes into town, and she hates doing it, but she feels like she has to in order to show the townspeople that she isn't afraid of them. And again, like, remember how I mentioned violent delusions before? Like, one of the delusions she has, it's like it's not so much a delusion, it's just kind of like a weird wish that she kind of has a vision of all the townspeople dead and her, like, walking over their bodies. Now, on some days, this whole ritual of her stopping in the diner goes just fine, and she's able to drink her coffee in relative peace, albeit with kind of resentful stares and people whispering behind her back, like from other patrons and stuff. But on this particular day, a guy named Jim comes in and sits down, like, at the bar, like, right next to her, and she knows that there's gonna be some trouble. And indeed, there is. Jim starts saying to the room at large, kind of sarcastically, there are rumors all over town that Mary Cat and Constance are going to be moving away, and won't that be just too bad? I mean, implying that everyone would be glad to see them leave, because, like I said, everyone kind of hates them. So Mary Cat tells him that they aren't moving and otherwise try to ignore him, like, as best she can, but he's really obnoxious and he won't leave her alone. And then another guy named Joe chimes in, who I think they changed his name to Bobby in the movie for some reason. I'm not entirely sure. Or maybe that's a different character. I don't know. But I was kind of confused when I looked that up. But this other guy, Joe, he says, oh, a while ago, the Blackwood family hired me to fix this broken back step, like, on their house, and I didn't get paid, and, you know, he's clearly still pretty salty about it. And Mary Cat says quietly that the reason he wasn't paid is that Constance thought he did a shitty job. So this whole diner interaction kind of highlights the resentment that the villagers feel toward the Blackwoods, who are very, very wealthy and very insular, and kind of look down on the townspeople, who they kind of see as not much more than savages, which is kind of snotty, but honestly, the way they behave, like, later on in the book, you can kind of see why they feel that way. Now, that's not the only reason, as I said, that everyone in town hates the family, though we don't find out the other reason until a bit later, at least in the book. As I mentioned, in the movie, it's revealed via voiceover as Mary Cat is walking into town, so, like, in the first few minutes of the movie. So finally, this confrontation in the diner gets so heated that the diner owner, whose name is Stella, tells Mary Cat to get the fuck out so there won't be any further hassle. This scene actually plays out pretty similarly in the movie, but there's an added bit where Jim was supposedly in love with Constance, but Mary Cat and Constance's dad didn't approve of him and got him fired from his job. Now, this angle here is not in the book. In fact, Jim was married, I think they mentioned, and he is still employed. And also not in the book was the moment where Jim puts his cigarette out in Mary Cat's coffee, as he does in the movie. He doesn't do that in the book. Stella, the diner owner, is also portrayed much more sympathetically in the film than she was in the novel, both in this scene and another scene toward the end. She's only, like, in 2 scenes in the movie. And, in the movie, she seems to actually feel bad for the Blackwoods and stands up to the other locals on their behalf. In the book, she's cordial to Mary Cat, like, she's not rude to her face or anything like that, and she even tries to get Jim to stop bothering her, but she clearly dislikes Mary Cat and the rest of the Blackwoods just as much as everyone else in town does. So Mary Cat makes her way back home, mostly unmolested, except for some kids taunting her with this rhyme. And this rhyme goes, Mary Cat, said Connie, would you like a cup of tea? Oh no, said Mary Cat, you'll poison me. Mary Cat, said Connie, would you like to go to sleep down in the boneyard 10 feet deep? Now, this rhyme is actually repeated a few times as all the kids in town know it. And it kind of gives a hint as to the other thing that the villagers hate the Blackwoods for. So while this is going on, while the kids are harassing her, and the mom just comes out and doesn't stop them, obviously, she just kind of chuckles at the whole thing. She's like, hey, yeah, fuck that bitch, you know what I mean? So Mary Cat kind of goes inward, as she usually does, and tries to dissociate, mostly imagining that she lives in this fabulous house on the moon, and that the children are, like, curling up in pain and rotting at her feet. So, like I said, kind of violent delusions. So when she gets home, Constance is out in the yard, and she asks if Mary Cat is proud of her because she came all the way to the edge of the property today. So Constance, we discern, is agoraphobic, as was Shirley Jackson herself, fun fact. and she never leaves the house. Though she very playfully tells Mary Cat, "Oh, I'll be following you into town soon enough, like, because I came this far today." Now, this prospect seems to horrify Mary Cat, and she basically just tells Constance, "Yeah, you wouldn't like it very much." So the dynamic between the two sisters is really interesting. It's kind of like the whole heart of the novel, really. Constance seems like this kind of angelic, very kind, just endlessly patient young woman. And her favorite thing to do is she grows food in her garden. She's always out in her garden and talking about her garden. And she's always like making preserves and like canning things. And she makes these real special, like elaborate meals and desserts for Mary Cat and Julian. And she seems to really be into that. Now, she clearly adores Mary Cat and she kind of indulges Mary Cat's bizarre whims and fancies. And Mary Cat is also fiercely protective of Constance in return. Mary Cat, in fact, has been using some more of that sympathetic magic in order to shield Constance from harm. Like, one of the things she does is she buries items, like, significant to the family, like heirlooms and silver coins and stuff like that, out in the garden around the perimeter of the property. And she's also nailed this kind of journal belonging to their dad to a tree, like out at the edge of the property again. Since we're inside Mary Cat's head for the entire story, because it's, from her point of view, we realize how deeply she believes that these spells, because that's what they are keeping the outside world at bay and forming a kind of protective bubble around what remains of the Blackwood family. So through various means, such as Mary Cat's inner thoughts and Julian talking about a book he's working on, the reader eventually discovers that 6 years prior to the events of the novel, Mary Cat and Constance's parents, whose name were John and Ellen, their Aunt Dorothy, who was Julian's wife, and their 10-year-old brother Thomas were all poisoned with arsenic that had been put in the sugar bowl at dinner. Now, Julian was poisoned too, but he survived because he hadn't used much sugar. They ate blackberries, like with sugar on them, and he didn't put much sugar on them, so he got sick, but he didn't die. But this is why he's still so sickly, and has also kind of become obsessed with documenting the event in this book that he's been writing. Now, I will note that in the movie, there is absolutely no mention of their brother, Thomas, at all. So they might as well not even have a brother as far as the movie is concerned. But in the book, they had a 10-year-old brother. And Dorothy, Julian's wife, is only mentioned sort of indirectly by Julian a couple of times. So, because back then, Mary Cat had been sent to bed without supper because she was acting up and was not at the table when the deaths occurred, Constance was accused of the murders because she was the only family member who didn't eat any sugar and thus obviously survived the massacre. She was also the person who bought the arsenic, though she later claimed that she had bought it to kill rats. Now, Constance was eventually acquitted at trial, but the townsfolk still believed she was guilty and essentially got away with poisoning almost her entire family. So between the villagers already thinking the Blackwoods were snobs, and then later on that one of them was a legit cold-blooded killer, it's pretty obvious why the girls are just shunned by everybody in the town. Now, shortly afterward, Mary Cat begins to have a bad feeling that some terrible change is about to occur. And these feelings are exacerbated by Constance mentioning a couple of times that she might start leaving the house again, which will obviously ruin this little closed, pleasant world that the sisters have made for themselves in this house. Right around this time, a neighbor who is actually still friendly toward them, who's another kind of wealthy woman named Helen Clark, she shows up for tea, which she does every week, like same day, same time. But this time, she brings another woman with her, which Mary Cat is not happy about because she has a routine that she really likes. Like every day they do a very specific thing at a specific time, and she's really used to that. So if something like interrupts her routine, like she gets real aggravated, which she does in this case because she's like, who the hell is this lady? And also when the two ladies come in, she gets even more agitated when Helen starts telling Constance, oh, you're so young and so pretty. You should come back out into the world. Everyone's forgotten all about that nasty business from 6 years ago, which is obviously not the case. And in fact, the woman that Helen brought with her, whose name is Lucille Wright, is fascinated by the murders. And Julian kind of comes out and sort of indulges her by showing her the dining table. This is where it happened, and kind of filling her in on all the grisly details. And she's like really like into it. You know what I mean? Helen is absolutely mortified because before they'd come there, she had specifically told Lucille not to bring up the murders because she just finds the whole subject just terribly gauche. It's just something you don't do. You know what I mean? Just don't bring it up. So she very, very tightly tells Lucille to knock it off, and the two women end up leaving. After which, Mary Cat, Constance, and Julian are kind of amused at how they essentially drove the women away, almost like they planned the whole thing. This all plays out very similarly in the movie, although obviously the book goes into a lot more detail and has a lot more dialogue, particularly with Julian describing the murders to Lucille. So more portents of a change become more pronounced in both the book and the movie. In the book, though, Julian is visited by the town doctor around this time. It's kind of like a little short visit or whatever. This incident is not in the movie, which, it wasn't a hugely significant thing that happened, so I can see why they left it out. A few days after Helen's visit, Mary Cat is doing her weekly routine of going around the property, making sure that all her kind of totems and spells and everything are still in place, when she notices that the journal that she had nailed to the tree that had belonged to her dad has fallen off the tree, and into the grass. I guess the nail, rusted or something like that. And she considers this a very, very, very bad omen. Now, in the movie, she also finds that the book has fallen off the tree, but it's after the big change has already occurred. And she's just like, oh shit, you know what I mean? But in the book, it happens before that, which is kind of like a kind of foreshadowing, you know what I mean? And in the movie, a bunch of her other totems had been dug up as well, which didn't make a huge amount of sense to me, but, whatever. So in the book, because the book has fallen off the tree, Mary Cat is super anxious about it, and she decides, well, it's ruined. The journal is ruined as magic now. It's no longer effective. So she's like, I should go find something else, something more powerful, to bring to nail to the tree, to strengthen the protection. This isn't really mentioned in the film, though it's made pretty clear in both mediums that Mary Cat believes the journal coming loose from the tree allowed the change to happen because one of her most powerful protections had fallen away. So the change that Mary Cat had been dreading finally occurs with the arrival of their estranged cousin, Charles Blackwood, who's actually the son of Julian's other brother, Arthur, who was not the one that died in the poisoning. That was John. Now, in the book, Mary Cat is at home when he arrives, and she sees him through the window when he's coming up the walk. And she thinks at first that he's one of the villagers that have come to harass them, because that happens sometimes. In the movie, Constance happens to send Mary Cat on an errand to town to buy sugar, of all things, on a day that isn't one of her regular days, which is freaks Mary Cat out. She's like, what the fuck is going on? That's not my day. And Charles is already in the house talking to Constance when Mary Cat comes back, obviously much to Mary Cat's chagrin. In the movie, it almost makes it seem as though Constance knew Charles was coming, though this isn't explicitly stated, and maybe I'm just reading into it. But in the book, he just turns up without any warning at all, surprising both of them. Also in the book, it's stated outright that Charles is only showing up now because his father Arthur has died. Arthur had actually forbidden Charles from visiting before due to the whole murder scandal. It's also revealed that Charles's father died broke, which heavily suggests that Charles has only come to see the Blackwoods, see his cousins, because he knows that they have a shit ton of money in the house that he's very eager to get his little grubby mitts on. In the movie, I don't think that Charles mentions his father's death or even if his father is dead. And in fact, it seemed to me as though the movie was trying to imply that he'd been traveling or living in Italy, perhaps. There's a lot of stuff about, he speaks a little bit of Italian and he has a lot of Italian stuff. And that's why he's never been to see them before now. So Constance lets Charles in and seems pretty charmed by him. But Mary Cat is terrified and is absolutely livid with rage, and she actually runs off to hide in this spot she's made for herself in the woods. She sleeps out there sometimes. Runs off there with her beloved kitty cat, whose name is Jonas. Jonas is also in the movie, and don't worry, nothing bad happens to him, in either the book or the movie, because it had been such a long time since I read the book, and I remembered her having the cat, And then I was just kind of like, oh shit, does something bad happen? Because a couple times you think something bad's going to happen to the cat, but nothing does. Nothing does. It's fine. And I was just like, please don't kill the kitty. Like, because the kitty was kind of a cool character, you know what I mean? So Mary Cat, while she's out in the woods, she does some more rituals, hoping it will drive Charles away or even make him cease to exist. You know what I mean? And when she comes back to the house the following morning, she's actually really pleased because it looks like her magic apparently worked because Charles is like not around. But then she discovers that Charles is still in the house. He's actually sleeping in their dad's old room. And she throws a glass on the kitchen floor, thinking that breaking the glass will like magically make him leave. Now, Constance totally kind of fawns over Charles in both the book and the movie. She just takes great pains to cook him these delicious meals, cleans up after him, and is just generally being a really genial but kind of subservient host, you know what I mean? Julian is also initially kind of happy that he's there. She's kind of like interested to have him around to talk to. For a different perspective on things. So that kind of leaves Mary Cat alone in her hatred of Charles. Now, Charles tries to befriend her, not entirely in a genuine way, I gotta say. But Mary Cat is not having it. Not only because she suspects what he's probably up to, but also because she's afraid that he'll take Constance away from her. And as time goes on, it does seem as though Charles indeed intends to take Constance away. Although it's pretty obvious in both book and movie that he doesn't really give much of a shit about Constance as a person. He just wants all the money that they keep in this big safe in their house. Charles, over time, starts being rude to Julian, too, like basically telling him to stop dwelling on the murder so much and kind of categorizing him as just this weak, complaining old man who should probably be put in a hospital or in a home. So Julian starts becoming more disillusioned with Charles's presence, like he's getting annoyed at all the noise he makes. He's like, I can't get any writing done with him here. And he's just causing trouble and stress. Charles also tells Mary Cat to her face that he'll probably still be in the house in a month and kind of suggests that maybe Mary Cat won't be. Constance, though, doesn't really seem to see Charles's flaws. Maybe because she's so enchanted with the idea of leaving the household and having a regular life again, which she hasn't done for 6 years. Charles is like constantly on her case, like for waiting on Julian and Mary Cat. It's like they treat you like a slave, blah, blah, blah. And Constance seems at least partially susceptible to his arguments, but she also kind of comes across as real confused and very conflicted, and that's in both the book and the movie. So tensions in the household begin to escalate as it becomes more and more clear that Charles is not planning on leaving anytime soon and is trying to get his hooks into Constance. He offers to fix that pesky backstep that, remember, Joe didn't fix before, and he even says he'll take over Mary Cat's grocery trips to town, which makes Mary Cat really, really angry. Even though she hates going to town, as I said before, she's kind of a stickler for routine, and going to town on Tuesdays and Fridays, that's always been her responsibility. So she feels as though her place in the family or her place in the household is being usurped, and she doesn't like it. So again, she attempts some spells to get Charles to leave. She's outwardly very rude to him, and sometimes she'll recite facts about poisonous mushrooms, while they're having dinner to kind of try and scare him or whatever. But nothing works. Charles just persists in hanging around, and Constance just constantly tries to smooth over relations between everyone in the house, because everyone's just really not getting along. Now, one day, while Charles is in town, Mary Cat sneaks into his room, which of course was her father's room, and takes this gold watch chain that she nails to the tree where the journal was before. Now, Charles actually finds it and is furious that Mary Cat would treat these such valuable items with carelessness as he sees it. He doesn't really understand the reasons why she's doing it. And he basically also accuses Constance of coddling her and indulging her mental illnesses, essentially. This is similar to what happens in the movie, although Mary Cat doesn't nail a gold chain to a tree. She actually buries a gold watch of her father's, and then Charles later finds it when he's helping Constance in the garden. In the book, Charles also finds a big jar of silver coins that Mary Cat has buried as a spell, and has a fit about that. In the movie, he actually finds them in a box under the broken step, like while he's fixing it. In the book, it's just in the garden somewhere. In the movie, Constance later gives this box to Julian to keep his papers in, but in the book, she just gives him a random box, like after he asks her for one. Also in the book, Charles does a bad job of fixing the step, like he fucks it up. But in the movie, he fixes it correctly. There's also a scene in the movie where Mary Cat kind of surreptitiously follows Charles into town one day, and she watches through the window of the diner as the villagers talk to him and start becoming kind of hostile when they find out who he is. Mary Cat then actually keys his car before running back to town, like he doesn't see her. In the book, Mary Cat does follow Charles into town one day, but it's just briefly touched upon. Nothing much really happens. She just sees him talking to Stella, the diner owner, for a few minutes. She sees him buying a newspaper and kind of sitting with some of the other local men on a bench. And, you know, like I said, she can't really hear him or anything. She doesn't damage any of his property, but, I mean, not yet, anyway. So Mary Cat seems to become convinced that Charles is a ghost or a demon. And she starts to suspect that more powerful magic might be needed to expel him. Julian, meanwhile, is constantly afraid that Charles is going to take his papers. He actually calls him dishonest. Even though the movie version of Julian, who, as I said, is played by Crispin Glover, is much younger than I perceive Julian to be in the book, he's pretty similarly mentally addled in both the novel and the film. He actually sometimes thinks Charles is his dead brother, John. And he one time tells Charles that Mary Cat died in an orphanage 6 years ago while Constance was on trial for murder, which seems kind of random on its face, but turns out to be a little bit significant in light of the book's later reveal. One day, when Charles is out, Mary Cat goes into his room and pretty much like seeks to eliminate his presence from it, like leaving no room for him in a magical sense. So she takes her father's watch that Charles has been wearing, and she winds it back so far that she breaks it. Again, kind of a magical connotation there. And she then pretty much trashes his room. She brings in all these dirt and sticks from outside and like shoves them into every available crevice. She pours water on the bed. She yanks the curtains down. She breaks the mirror. She, just tips shit over and everything like that. She does pretty much the same thing in the movie. I think she puts sticks and dirt on the bed in the movie, but I think in the book she just poured water on it. I don't remember her turning the watch back in the movie, though. But like I said, in the book, it's kind of like she does that first because that's like a significant, from a magical point of view, she's like turning back time. You know what I mean? So naturally, Charles is apoplectic when he returns home and sees the mess. And he tries to get Constance to punish Mary Cat, but Constance, as usual, attempts to downplay the incident. She does nicely ask her sister, hey, why don't you be kinder to Charles because he's not a bad guy, but that's the extent of it. She basically tries to soothe Charles by blaming herself for all of it, telling him I'll clean it all up, there's no harm done, it's not a big deal. Now, during this ensuing argument, it's also implied that Julian and his wife Dorothy were, back in the day, kind of at loggerheads with John and Ellen Blackwood, like back when they were still alive, because Julian says some things to Charles, while he thinks that it's his brother John that he's talking to, about Julian and Dorothy leaving the house because of the way they were being treated. And it was specifically something having to do with they thought that Dorothy was eating too much food or something like that. So Mary Cat goes off by herself to get away from all the fuss, and this time she goes to this kind of abandoned summer house on the property that's been abandoned for like years and years. And while she's there, she has this real vivid hallucination of her parents telling her how much they love her and that she should never be punished for anything. A similar scene to this occurs in the film where she's out there and she sees her parents like sitting all dressed up for dinner, like in the dining room chairs, but like out in the grass, So later that evening, Mary Cat returns home for dinner. Charles is still mad. And he tells her that him and Constance have been discussing what to do about her. Now, Constance tells her to go upstairs and wash up for dinner, and Mary Cat goes, but while she's up there, she goes into Charles's room and kind of sweeps his pipe into the wastebasket next to his bed, which has some crumpled newspaper pages in it. And then she goes back down to the table to eat. Obviously, not long after this, Charles smells smoke, and they eventually track down the source. By this time, the fire has actually spread to encompass most of the room. It's upstairs. So Charles is panicking because there's no phone in the house to call for help. It was established earlier on in both the book and the movie that the Blackwoods disconnected their phone because essentially the villagers kept prank calling them, like I said, and, calling them with death threats and whatnot. So he basically screams at Constance, get the money out of the safe and get the hell out of the house, and then he takes off toward town to alert the fire department. Now, in the movie, Charles actually bodily grabs Mary Cat and starts dragging her, like, across the dining room and, like, up the stairs and kind of beating on her, kind of strangling her and stuff, when he suspects, correctly, that she started the fire in his room. This is much more violent than the events in the book. Charles doesn't touch her. He just pretty much runs around yelling about the safe. In the book, when the firefighters arrive, who are led by Jim from the diner earlier, who's actually the fire chief, they pretty much just brush past Mary Cat and Constance and go into the house to put the fire out. Mary Cat and Constance then go hide in the woods to, like, watch everything that's happening. Julian stays behind to gather his papers, but the girls are pretty certain he'll be able to get out because the fire is still pretty small and contained upstairs, and his room isn't far from the back door. Like, he's downstairs. In the movie, though, Julian locks himself in his room and won't come out even when the girls bang on the door, like, to try to rescue him. Like, it's almost like he did it on purpose. The two girls also actually hide in the house for a little while before the fire starts to spread, and then they climb out a window. At this point, some of the townspeople see them and start grabbing at them and essentially, like, assaulting them, until one of the friendly villagers comes and says, hey, Julian is dead inside and everybody should have some respect, like, let them go. None of this happens in the book. The villagers actually never look for the girls, and the girls stay hidden in the woods the whole time. Like, a couple people are like, hey, are the girls in there? Where are they? I don't know, haven't seen them, you know what I mean? And then they're just like, whatever. They're just watching the fire. Julian actually died of a heart attack in the movie and in the book. In the novel, it was established during the doctor visit, which was not in the movie, that he had heart problems, but I don't think the movie mentioned it. In both mediums, though, most of the locals standing around on the property watching the fire tell the firefighters to let the house burn down, whether the Blackwoods are in there or not. In the movie, just as in the book, the fire chief, Jim, comes out and tells everyone the fire is extinguished, and then, after a minute, picks up a rock and throws it through one of the downstairs windows. And so the townsfolk, encouraged by this, also start throwing rocks, like, through all the windows, breaking them, and then a whole herd of them, like, stampede into the house and start trashing the place. Charles, who has returned, he tries to drag the safe out of the house, but it's too heavy and he ends up leaving it. In the movie, the safe is actually much larger, and it's actually not able to be moved, so he tries to open it, but he can't get it open. So Constance and Mary Cat hide out in Mary Cat's kind of special place in the woods, soon joined by little kitty, Jonas, who also escaped the fire happily. In the movie, Jonas actually isn't shown until the next morning, and I don't know if the movie did that to have, like, a little suspense over whether the kitty survived or not, but yeah, the kitty survives, it's fine. So the following morning, the girls come out of hiding and see that their house is pretty much now a ruin. The entire second floor has been burned away, thus making the house resemble a turreted castle, hence the "We Have Always Lived in the Castle" title. The damage was actually slightly less severe in the movie. Some of the structure of the second floor remained. In the book, it really didn't. Actually, I think it was even open to the sky in some places, which in the movie it kind of is too, but it's, like I said, the second floor is still kind of sort of there, but in the book it was not. In the book, actually, all the girls' clothes were burned because their bedrooms were on the second floor, and that's gone. And so Constance ended up having to wear Julian's clothes because his room was on the ground floor, and it was all right. And Mary Cat ends up having to make herself a sort of poncho dress situation out of a tablecloth. So none of that happens in the movie. So Constance and Mary Cat kind of set about boarding up the lower floors, like all the broken windows and stuff, and cleaning up everything they can, intending to stay in their significantly diminished house pretty much indefinitely. Mary Cat remarks that she's going to poison the whole village in revenge, and it's here that it's revealed that it was indeed Mary Cat who poisoned the family 6 years ago, specifically putting the arsenic in the sugar because she knew that Constance wouldn't eat it. But she wanted to kill the rest of the motherfuckers, but she wouldn't kill Constance because she loves her. It's also revealed that Constance knew that Mary Cat was the one that was responsible for the murders and never told anyone, even taking the risk that she herself might be convicted of the murder. So Helen Clark, the tea lady from earlier, and her husband come by the house and kind of bang on the door. They actually were one of the few people in town, two of the few people in town that actually liked the girls. So they bang on the door to check on them and to tell them when Julian's funeral is, because that's all been arranged and stuff. But Mary Cat and Constance pretty much just hide behind the kitchen table and refuse to answer the door, answer anyone's summons at all. Helen and her husband actually try to come back like once or twice, like to see what happened to them. But after a while, they give up because the girls won't answer. And then at this point, something kind of odd begins to happen. The townspeople, evidently guilty about destroying and looting the house after the fire, adding insult to injury, essentially, they start to bring offerings of food for the girls. Like, one old man starts the whole thing off. He leaves, like, a pie and some chicken or something like that, like, outside the front door. But soon enough, other locals start doing the same thing, like leaving food on their porch in the middle of the night that they've made. Almost like it's penance, like, for their actions, you know what I mean? Which were quite horrible. I mean, when you think about it. Well, you don't even have to think about it. They were horrible. Constance and Mary Cat find this very amusing. And they just basically go about their isolated lives, just they eat the food that's brought to them, and they keep themselves pretty much hidden away in the house and never come out. Now, although the book and the movie have been following pretty closely along up to now, right here is where the biggest change takes place. In the novel, Charles returns to the house with a journalist with him, and he tries to get Constance to come out and talk to him. Constance and Mary Cat pretty much hide in the house and keep silent, as they usually do. And since Charles can't get inside because they've done a really good job of boarding it up and using, stacking furniture against the outside and stuff like that so people can't get in, he eventually leaves and never returns. In the movie, however, Charles comes back alone and is able to bust into the house. And he attacks Constance in a rage. Like, he jumps on her and throws her down on the ground and starts, trying to strangle her or whatever. And then Mary Cat grabs a possession of his that he left, which was, this snow globe that has the Leaning Tower of Pisa in it, and beans him over the head with it, and that knocks him out. And then she stabs him repeatedly with the little tower sticking out of the snow globe, which kills him, because she just keeps on fucking doing it. You know what I mean? The girls then bury him in the garden. Obviously, Charles survives in the book. Nothing this brutal happens to him. He basically tries to get in, he can't get in, and he leaves, and they never hear from him again. However, in the movie, Mary Cat straight up murders him, and then they bury him, and that's what happens. Also, toward the very end of the movie, a couple of little kids approach the house on a dare, sometime later, you're led to assume, and Mary Cat comes out for a moment and, kind of frightens them away. It's implied that all kinds of, kind of stories and legends and stuff have sprung up about them, in the time since the fire. This is similar to what happens in the book, but I don't think that either Mary Cat or Constance was seen by the townsfolk, ever again. And in fact, ivy eventually grows and mostly covers the house, with the sisters still living in there. And everyone just kind of talks about them, in hushed tones, they're still back there behind all the ivy, you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. But I don't think anybody ever sees them again in the book. So, as I mentioned earlier, the movie was a mostly faithful and actually pretty decent adaptation of the book. Had really nice cinematography, very good acting. Oddly, however, I found that even though the movie exaggerated several incidents from the book, making them more overtly violent, Mary Cat keying Charles's car, Charles assaulting Mary Cat after the fire started, the townspeople assaulting the girls, during the fire, and Mary Cat straight up murdering Charles, at the end. The book is still a lot creepier to me than the movie is, for reasons I can't quite put my finger on. I think maybe it's because the book is entirely from Mary Cat's point of view, and she's such a disturbed person, but still kind of sympathetic, that just being in her head for that length of time is kind of unsettling enough on its own. The movie did try to replicate this a bit with an occasional voiceover where Mary Cat kind of described her thoughts, what was going on in her head, but it wasn't obviously exactly the same as reading it on a page and, having it. It's a voiceover is always kind of gonna, it's not the best way to get things across, you know what I mean? But sometimes I understand that's the only way you can do it. I'd even go so far as to say, as while I would classify the book as subtle gothic horror, I don't think I'd call the film that. It's a good movie despite the caveat, but I don't think that the movie is a horror movie. I don't think the novel is a horror novel either, but it's more horror-y than the movie is, if that makes any sense. So the novel obviously is much, much better, and it kind of gets under your skin in a way that the film doesn't, even though it is a good movie. So I'd be curious to kind of know anyone else's thoughts on the matter, like if anyone else has read the book or seen the movie and try to compare the two and things like that. I'm always kind of interested in y'all's insights about it as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this long-ass discussion. If you liked this content, please remember, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys in the salon next time. Bye.